I didn't think the moment I'd consider asking my own daughter to leave home would start with something as stupid as flour on a countertop. But that's how it happened. It was late, the kind of evening where the whole house feels a little smaller, walls holding onto everyone's stress like heat. I came into the kitchen and the first thing I saw was the mess. White flour dusted across the counter like someone had thrown a handful of snow indoors. Two greasy pans soaking in the sink, but not actually soaking, and crumbs and scraps ground into the tile like they'd been stepped on and forgotten. Cherry had cooked dinner for herself while on a video call with her fiancé, Marco, phone propped up, speaker on, her laugh sharp and loud as she walked from stove to counter like the rest of us didn't exist. My husband Drew didn't raise his voice. He didn't lecture. He didn't shame her. He just said carefully, the way you speak when you're trying not to strike a match in a room full of gas. Hey, Cherry, can you please clean up the kitchen when you're done? That was it. And my daughter, my 22-year-old daughter who lives here rent-free, eats our food, uses our Wi-Fi, our streaming services, our electricity, spun around like he'd slapped her. Her face changed first, eyes narrowing, jaw locking, shoulders tightening. You always do this, she snapped. You treat me like I'm 12. Drew tried to keep his tone gentle. It's just the house rule, honey. Whoever cooks cleans. Cherry's voice rose fast, like something inside her had been building pressure all day and finally found a target. You're controlling, she shouted. Both of you. You're like dictators, prison wardens. This house is basically a prison. From the dining room, my son Robin, 16, hunched over homework, flinched like the sound hit him in the chest. He gathered his books without a word and disappeared upstairs. Cherry kept going, words spilling out sharp and messy, like she wanted them to cut. I can't wait to leave. I'm going to move out and never come back. Then she stormed down the hallway and slammed her bedroom door so hard a framed picture jumped off the wall and clattered onto the floor. The sound echoed. And in the sudden quiet, Drew and I just stood there, staring at flour, dishes, and the ugly truth we'd been avoiding for a year. This wasn't a one-time blow-up. This was becoming our normal. And I didn't know how much longer our family could live like this. If you'd met Cherry on a good day, hair up in a messy bun, lipstick on, talking a mile a minute about her job and her future plans, you'd probably assume we were exaggerating. You'd probably think, she sounds fine. She sounds like any 20-something figuring life out. That's what made this so confusing. Cherry wasn't a bad kid. She wasn't reckless in the obvious ways. She'd worked since she was 16, always had a resume, always knew how to charm adults into thinking she was responsible. She was bright, social, quick with words. She could make a room laugh and then, 5 minutes later, make you feel guilty for asking her to load a dishwasher. I'm 45. I never pictured myself as one of those moms who argues with her adult child about chores, like we're roommates who secretly hate each other. I have a steady job, a mortgage, a life built around routines that keep me sane. Drew is 43. My husband, my partner, the person who still makes coffee the way I like it without being asked, the person who tries to soften every sharp edge in our home. And then there's Robin, 16, quiet in that teenage way that's half moodiness and half self-protection. Lately, he'd been spending more time upstairs than downstairs, and I didn't blame him. Nobody wants to do algebra while someone screams dictator 2 rooms away. Cherry graduated about 18 months ago with a communications degree. We were proud. We helped pay for half her tuition because we didn't want her to drown in student loans the way Drew still was. Yes, still. 20 years later, and he was still making payments, the kind that turn adulthood into a slow grind of obligations. After graduation, Cherry moved into an apartment with friends. She called it freedom. She posted pictures of her iced coffee on balconies and joked about being a real adult now. It lasted 6 months. Then, one afternoon, she came home with her shoulders hunched, voice small in a way I hadn't heard since she was 13. I think I should move back for a while, she said, just to save money. And honestly, it made sense. The rent was ridiculous. She had an entry-level job at a marketing firm, full-time, decent pay for someone fresh out of college. She told us she wanted to save for a wedding someday, a future. We told her yes. We didn't ask for rent. We didn't demand utilities. We didn't make her earn her spot in her own childhood bedroom. We covered everything. Food, Wi-Fi, streaming services, electricity, water. We even kept paying for the extras, little comforts, because we thought, she's our daughter. She's getting on her feet. The only bill Cherry truly handled was her car payment, about $225 a month. Everything else she earned went into savings, in theory. In practice, it also went into shopping, weekend trips, and constant deliveries. Boxes arriving like she was running an online boutique out of our foyer. And then Marco happened. Cherry met Marco online around a year ago. He's 24 and lives in Colombia. At first, I tried to be open-minded. Long-distance relationships happen. People meet in strange ways now. I told myself not to judge something just because it didn't look like my own life. But the speed of it, that was what made my stomach tighten. 6 months into dating, mostly video calls, voice notes, late-night laughter floating through our hallway, she came downstairs one morning holding up her left hand. A ring. Not expensive looking, but shiny enough to catch the kitchen light. "We're engaged," she said, eyes bright like she'd swallowed fireworks. Drew blinked, like he didn't understand the words. I felt my face freeze into a smile so fast it almost hurt. "Engaged?" I repeated, because sometimes your brain needs to hear a thing twice before it believes it. Cherry launched into the story talking about how, when you know, how Marco was different, how he really sees her. She said she'd visited him 5 times already, each trip only 3 to 5 days, rushed and romantic like a vacation that ends before reality starts. By my count, they'd spent less than 3 weeks total together in person before deciding to get married. The wedding was scheduled for December, and it wasn't just the speed. It was how Marco filled our house without ever stepping into it. Cherry had him on speaker constantly, while cooking, while folding laundry, while walking from room to room like she was narrating her life for him. I'd be trying to watch a show with Robin, and Cherry's voice would float over it, laughing too loud, telling Marco what we were eating, commenting on us like we were background characters in her video call. When we asked, politely, for her to take calls in her room, she acted like we'd committed a crime. "I can't even talk in my own house?" she'd snap. And that phrase, "my own house," was where the tension started to rot into something deeper. Because it wasn't her house. It was ours. Yet she treated it like a hotel where the staff were required to tolerate her moods. We tried to have calm talks. We suggested practical steps. Maybe Marco should visit us so we could meet him before our daughter married him. She said visa issues made it impossible. We suggested she consider spending time in Colombia first. Get an apartment, see what daily life felt like, date in real life before vows. She shut it down instantly. "No, that's not how it works. You don't understand." Cherry said moving in before marriage might not be culturally appropriate. She said Marco lived with family and there wasn't room. Her plan was to marry in December, quit her job here, and move permanently to Colombia. She'd barely started learning Spanish. And that's when the basic rules became flashpoints. We didn't ask for anything extreme. We asked her to do her own laundry, clean up after herself, respect quiet time when Robin was studying, and not leave messes like a trail behind her. Rules she'd followed when she lived with roommates. Rules that should have felt normal. But with Cherry, every reminder sounded, somehow, like an accusation. Every request became a battle. And over the past year, those battles had gotten louder and uglier. Until the night of the flower-covered kitchen, when my daughter called us dictators and my son retreated upstairs like he'd learned the safest way to survive was to disappear. That was when I realized something painful. I wasn't just worried about Cherry. I was worried about what this was doing to all of us. The worst part wasn't the shouting. It was the way the tension seeped into everything else, like smoke you don't notice until your eyes start burning. After the blow-ups, Cherry would go quiet, not calm, cold. She'd walk past us without eye contact, take her meals to her room, and spend hours on video calls with Marco behind a closed door. I'd hear her voice through the walls sometimes, lower but sharp, complaining about us in fragments I wasn't supposed to catch. "They don't respect me. They treat me like a kid. I can't wait to get out of here." Each sentence landed like a small, deliberate cut. Drew tried to be the bridge. He always did. He'd knock softly on her door, asking if she wanted to talk, suggest a reset. Sometimes she'd open the door just long enough to say, "I'm busy," before closing it again. Other times she'd explode. It felt unpredictable, like living with a storm system that didn't follow weather reports. What scared me most was Robin. He stopped inviting friends over. He started eating dinner faster, like he was timing his escape upstairs. Once, when Cherry was yelling about how no one listens to her, I caught him flinch when she raised her voice, even though she wasn't yelling at him. That moment stayed with me. Cherry insisted we were always on her case, but the truth was quieter and harder to explain. We were walking on eggshells, trying to keep the peace without realizing how much we were shrinking ourselves to do it. And then there was Marco. I tried to keep my judgments internal. I didn't want to be that mother, the one who attacks her child's relationship just because it scares her. But it was impossible to ignore how Marco functioned as an amplifier. Whenever Cherry was upset with us, she'd retreat to her phone. A few hours later, she'd come back sharper, more convinced she was being wronged. Once, after Drew asked her to lower her voice during a late-night call, she snapped back with something Marco had clearly fed her. He says you're just threatened because you can't control me anymore. Threatened. By asking for quiet at 11 p.m. I started noticing patterns. Cherry would ask permission for small, insignificant things. Is it okay if I use the washer? Can I have a friend over? But make massive life decisions without consultation or planning. She'd shut down advice instantly, like accepting it would mean admitting she wasn't fully independent, and independence was the hill she was willing to die on. The irony was brutal. The more she demanded to be treated like an adult, the less she wanted to deal with adult responsibilities. Bills, not hers. Household maintenance? Not my problem. Shared space? You're overreacting. One night, after another argument about dishes, Drew sat on the edge of our bed and rubbed his face with both hands. I don't recognize her lately, he said quietly. It's like she's always braced for a fight. That's when I admitted the thought I'd been carrying like a stone in my chest. I'm starting to wonder if her staying here is actually hurting her. The words tasted like betrayal. What kind of mother thinks her daughter might be better off not living under her roof? But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were stuck in a loop, one that reinforced the worst parts of all of us. Cherry felt controlled. We felt disrespected. Robin felt invisible. Every attempt to communicate just added fuel. And beneath all of it was a question I was terrified to ask out loud. If Cherry was adult enough to get married and move to another country, why wasn't she adult enough to clean up after herself without calling us dictators? That question kept me awake at night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the muffled sound of Cherry laughing through her phone while Marco's voice buzzed faintly on speaker. It wasn't anger I felt then. It was fear. Fear that if we didn't change something soon, this house, our home, would become a place everyone wanted to escape. And fear that the next step might be one I never thought I'd take. Asking my own daughter to leave. The moment everything tipped didn't happen during one of Cherry's screaming matches. It happened the night she didn't come home. It was the evening after another argument, smaller than the flower incident, but sharper in tone. Drew had asked her to move her laundry from the washer so he could clean his work clothes for the next day. Nothing dramatic, no raised voices, just a request. Cherry's face hardened instantly. I never have any privacy in this house, she snapped. You're always watching me, always judging. Before either of us could respond, she grabbed her keys and walked out the front door. The door didn't slam. That almost made it worse. At first, I told myself she just needed air, space, time to cool down. She was an adult, after all. An hour passed. Then 2. I checked my phone. No messages, no missed calls. By 10:30, Drew sent a text. Where are you? Just let us know you're safe. No response. Robin came downstairs in his pajamas, eyes tired. Is Cherry okay? He asked quietly. I told him yes, that she was probably with friends, that she'd be back soon. I lied without even thinking about it. Midnight came and went. My chest felt tight in that dull, anxious way that doesn't spike into panic but never loosens its grip either. I kept replaying our last conversation, trying to figure out where it had gone wrong. At 12:30, Drew suggested calling her. She's 22, I said automatically, even as my fingers hovered over my phone. We shouldn't... But I did anyway. It rang until voicemail. That was the moment something inside me cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, but enough to let a truth slip through. This wasn't just about dishes, or laundry, or phone calls. This was about a power struggle neither of us knew how to step away from. Cherry came home just after 1 a.m. I heard the front door open softly, then her footsteps in the hallway. I stepped out of our bedroom before Drew could stop me. Where were you? I asked, keeping my voice level with effort. She looked surprised, almost offended, that I was waiting. Out, she said. I don't need permission to leave the house. I didn't say you did, I replied, but you didn't answer your phone. She rolled her eyes so hard it felt like a dismissal of everything I was feeling. I'm not a child. The words hit something raw. I stood there, heart pounding, and for the first time I didn't argue back. I didn't lecture. I didn't defend myself. I just looked at her, really looked at her, at the tension in her shoulders, the defiance in her posture, the way she seemed permanently braced, like every interaction was a threat. And I realized that whatever we were doing wasn't working. Not for her. Not for us. Not for Robin, who stood frozen halfway down the stairs, pretending not to listen, but hearing everything anyway. Cherry went to her room and closed the door. This time, she didn't slam it. Drew and I stood in the hallway for a long moment after that. "I can't keep living like this," he said finally. His voice wasn't angry, it was tired. "None of us can." We went to bed but didn't sleep. We talked in whispers, going over every option we'd been afraid to say out loud. Setting firmer boundaries. Charging rent. Giving her a timeline to move out. 30 days. 60 days. Something. Not as punishment, not as rejection. As reality. Because the truth was unavoidable now. Cherry wanted the freedom of adulthood without the structure that made shared living possible. And we were all paying for it. By morning, I knew something had to change. The question wasn't if, it was how, and whether confronting it would finally break us or save what was left of our family. The morning after Cherry came home at 1 a.m, the house felt like it was holding its breath. No one slammed doors, no one yelled. That somehow made it worse. Drew left early for work, coffee untouched on the counter. Robin ate cereal in silence, eyes fixed on his phone, like looking up might pull him back into something he didn't want to witness. Cherry stayed in her room with the door closed, the faint murmur of Marco's voice leaking through the walls like static. I sat at the kitchen table long after everyone else had gone, staring at the same spot where Flower had dusted the counter days earlier. I kept replaying the night before, her voice sharp with certainty. "I'm not a child." And the quiet truth underneath it, "But I'm not living like an adult either." I hated that my first reaction wasn't anger. It was doubt. Did we do this wrong? Did we coddle her too much? Did we push too hard? I thought about Cherry at 5 years old, dragging a chair across the kitchen so she could help me bake cookies, flour in her hair, proud of herself for being included. I thought about her at 16, begging to stay out later, insisting she was responsible, swearing she'd call if plans changed. Back then, structure felt like protection. Somewhere along the way, she started seeing it as a cage. That afternoon, Drew and I finally talked, really talked, without trying to fix each other's feelings. "I don't want to throw her out," I said, voice low. "I don't want her to think we're abandoning her." Drew nodded. "But I also don't want Robin growing up thinking this is normal. That yelling is how you get your way." That landed hard. I hadn't realized how much I'd been focusing on Cherry that I'd stopped seeing what this was doing to our son. He'd become quieter, more withdrawn. He'd learned to make himself small when the house got loud. That wasn't fair to him. That night, Cherry finally came downstairs. She didn't apologize. She didn't acknowledge the tension. She poured herself a drink and leaned against the counter, scrolling on her phone. I watched her, noticing things I'd ignored before. How she moved through the house like it owed her space. How she bristled at even neutral questions. "Can we talk later?" I asked gently. She didn't look up. "About what?" "About us, the living situation." She sighed like I'd asked her to donate a kidney. "Fine." But the word didn't sound like agreement. It sounded like a countdown. That was when I realized something painful but clarifying. If we went into this conversation accusing, demanding, or threatening, she'd shut down completely. She'd hear only rejection, not concern. I didn't want to win an argument. I wanted my daughter back. So instead of rehearsing ultimatums, I started thinking about questions. What did she think adulthood meant? What did she actually want from us? And what were we willing and not willing to keep doing? For the first time in months, I stopped trying to control the outcome and focused on understanding the problem. We decided to wait until Robin was out of the house for the weekend. He had a school trip coming up, and it felt wrong to have this conversation with him in earshot. The waiting was brutal. Cherry barely spoke to us that week. She came home late. She stayed on calls with Marco for hours. I overheard her complaining about how oppressive our house was, how she couldn't breathe here. Each word hurt, but instead of reacting, I let it sit. Because I knew now, whatever happened next had to be different. Not louder, not harsher, just honest. And when the time came, I promised myself one thing. I wouldn't start by telling Cherry what to do. I'd start by asking her who she thought she was becoming. The house felt strangely calm the weekend Robin left for his school trip. Too calm. Cherry knew something was coming. I could see it in the way she moved that day, more guarded, more deliberate. She came home on time, didn't retreat to her room right away, didn't put Marco on speaker like she usually did. It was like she'd sensed the air pressure change. I texted her that morning and asked her to be home for dinner. "We need to talk as a family," I wrote. She replied with one word. "Fine." Drew cooked her favorite meal, lasagna, layered carefully, like a peace offering disguised as dinner. I set the table the way I always did, hands steady but heart racing. I kept telling myself, don't turn this into a trial. Don't make it about winning. When Cherry walked in, she looked suspicious. Her eyes flicked from Drew to the table, like she was searching for the catch. She sat down, but didn't touch her food. I took a breath and started. "We love you," I said. "That's not negotiable, but the way things have been, it's not working." She opened her mouth, already defensive, but Drew gently held up a hand. "Let her finish," he said quietly. I talked about the tension, about the yelling, about Robin retreating upstairs, about how our home no longer felt safe or calm for anyone. Cherry crossed her arms. "So now it's my fault Robin's uncomfortable?" "That's not what I said," I replied, keeping my voice even. "But your reactions affect everyone in this house, just like ours affect you." Then I did something that surprised both of us. Instead of telling her what needed to change, I asked, "What do you think would make this better?" She froze. I don't think anyone had asked her that before, not genuinely, not without already having an answer in mind. For a long moment, she stared at the table, then she exhaled sharply. "I just want to be treated like an adult," she said, "not like I need permission for everything." Drew nodded. "Being an adult doesn't mean no responsibilities, Cherry. It means understanding how your actions affect the people you live with." I leaned forward slightly. "You're welcome to stay here, but this isn't your house. Drew and I pay the mortgage, the utilities, the food. That means we set the rules." Her head snapped up. "So I'm just a guest?" "No," I said. "You're our daughter, but you're not an equal partner in running this household." She looked genuinely stunned. So I laid it out. Numbers, facts, things we'd never made visible before. Her share of expenses, if split evenly, was over $850 a month. Rent she didn't pay, utilities she didn't see, groceries she never budgeted for. I watched the realization settle in, slow and uncomfortable. We talked expectations, cleaning up after herself, taking long or loud calls in her room, helping with dishes a few nights a week, letting us know if she'd be out late. In return, we promised to knock before entering her room, give advance notice for family plans, and, this was important, not comment on her relationship with Marco unless she asked. Cherry nodded. She said she understood, but I couldn't tell if she meant it or if she was just surviving the moment. The next morning, she left for a week-long work conference. The house exhaled. Drew and I sat in the quiet and talked more honestly than we had in months. He pointed out something I hadn't been able to name before. Cherry asked permission for tiny things but made massive life decisions without preparation. Extreme compliance followed by sudden rebellion. Over and over. When Cherry came back, things were better. Not perfect, but calmer. She cleaned up without being asked. Took calls in her room. Her tone softened. It felt like she was trying. But beneath the improvement, I still felt the ground shifting. Because the wedding was coming, and Columbia was coming, and I didn't know if this piece was a breakthrough or just the calm before another storm. The calm didn't break all at once. It eroded, slowly, quietly, in the spaces between conversations. For a few weeks after Cherry came back from her work conference, things felt manageable. She wiped counters. She loaded the dishwasher. She took her calls behind closed doors. Drew and I exchanged careful looks across the kitchen like people afraid to jinx fragile peace by acknowledging it out loud. But my anxiety didn't disappear. It just changed shape. I started noticing the cracks in the silence. Cherry would clean, but with an air of compliance, not cooperation. Like someone following rules because they had to, not because they understood why. When she spoke to us, her tone was polite but distant, as if we were coworkers instead of family. There was no warmth in it. And every night, once her bedroom door closed, Marco's voice came back. Lower now, muffled, but constant. Hours at a time. Laughter. Then quiet. Then tension again the next morning. The wedding clock was ticking. 6 weeks. That number kept looping in my head while I folded laundry or washed dishes. 6 weeks until she married a man we'd never met in person. 6 weeks until she quit her job, sold her car, and moved to another country where she barely spoke the language. And the hardest part? I could feel myself losing her. Not physically, emotionally. She was already halfway gone. One night I overheard her crying softly through her door. Not sobbing, just that broken, exhausted breathing people make when they're trying not to fall apart. I stood there with my hand hovering near the door, unsure whether knocking would help or make it worse. I walked away. That choice haunted me, because the truth I didn't want to face was this. I was terrified she was running away, not toward something. Terrified that her marriage wasn't just about love, but escape. and worse, terrified that if it all fell apart in Colombia, she'd be alone in a way I couldn't reach. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night. Cherry was packing boxes in the living room, summer clothes she planned to ship ahead. I watched her fold dresses, stack sandals, tuck things away with a kind of frantic efficiency. "You might want to pack a jacket," I said carefully. "Bogota gets cold at night. It's high elevation." She didn't look up. "I don't need advice." "I'm not giving advice," I said, just mentioning it. She snapped upright. "Why do you always do this?" she said. "Why can't you just let me do things my way?" My chest tightened. "I'm trying to help." "No," she shot back. "You're trying to control me. You just want me gone. You're already erasing me from this house." The words knocked the air out of me. "That's not true," I said too fast. "We're not trying to erase you." "Then why does it feel like you're counting down until I leave?" Because maybe part of me was, and the guilt of that realization crushed me. We stood there staring at each other, years of misunderstandings piled between us like furniture we never bothered to rearrange. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just felt empty. That night, I cried in the shower so Drew wouldn't hear me. I pressed my forehead against the tile and let myself feel the thing I'd been avoiding since all this started. I couldn't protect her from every bad decision, and I couldn't keep our family intact by force. For the first time since Cherry was born, I truly understood that loving her might mean stepping back, even if every instinct in my body screamed to hold on tighter. That realization hurt more than any fight we'd had. It was the lowest point, not because things were explosive, but because I finally accepted that I might have to let go without knowing if she'd be okay. The shift didn't come from a grand confrontation. It came from listening. A few days after the argument about the jacket, Cherry came home late, shoulders slumped in a way I hadn't seen before. Her makeup was smudged, her voice tight when she said hello. Normally, I would have jumped in, asked questions, offered advice, tried to fix whatever had gone wrong. This time I didn't. I poured 2 glasses of water and sat at the kitchen table. When she walked past, I just said, "You look like you've had a long day." She stopped. Slowly, she sat down across from me. And for the first time in months, she talked without yelling. Work had been overwhelming. Wedding planning felt like a second full-time job. The move scared her more than she wanted to admit. She said she felt like everyone expected her to be confident and excited, but inside, she was constantly wondering if she was making a huge mistake. I didn't interrupt. I didn't reassure her with empty promises. I just listened. When she paused, I asked questions, not to guide her, but to understand. What was she most afraid of? What part of moving felt hardest? What did she hope her life would look like a year from now? She admitted something quietly, almost like a confession. "I take things out on you and Drew because I know you won't leave." That sentence changed everything. It wasn't an excuse, but it was the truth. We talked about adulthood, not as independence from everyone, but as accountability to yourself and the people you live with. I told her that respect goes both ways and that needing support doesn't make her weak. She nodded, eyes wet. "I don't want to mess this up," she whispered. "I just don't know how to slow down." That night, something softened between us. After that, our conversations changed. We talked more about Marco, about Colombia, about logistics instead of control. Drew noticed it too. He started asking questions instead of setting rules. He listened. He backed off when she bristled. And Cherry responded. She asked Drew to go wedding dress shopping with her. She practiced our father-daughter dance in the living room, laughing when we stepped on each other's feet. She started spending less time on video calls and more time present with us. The house didn't feel tense anymore. It felt transitional, like something ending without breaking. The night before Cherry flew out for the wedding, she hugged me longer than usual. "I know I've been hard to live with," she said quietly. "Thank you for not giving up on me." I hugged her back, realizing something important. Letting go wasn't abandonment. It was trust. Trust that she could grow. Trust that our bond didn't depend on proximity or control. That was the turning point, not because everything was suddenly perfect, but because we finally stopped fighting each other and started standing beside one another. And for the first time since the flower-covered kitchen, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long while. Hope. The wedding came faster than I was ready for. One moment, I was helping Cherry pack the last of her things, deciding what would go to Colombia, what would stay in our house, what would be donated. And the next, I was standing in a garden venue watching my daughter walk toward a life that no longer revolved around us. She looked beautiful, calm, certain in a way that made my chest ache. Marco arrived a week before the wedding with his family. Meeting them in person shifted something I hadn't realized I was holding so tightly. Marco wasn't loud or dismissive. He was respectful, attentive, gentle in the way he spoke to Cherry. He asked Drew questions. He thanked me for everything, over and over, like he understood that he was stepping into something precious. The language barrier was real. His parents spoke almost no English. Our Spanish was clumsy and limited, but warmth doesn't need translation. Smiles filled the gaps. So did shared meals, laughter, and the slow realization that this wasn't a fantasy Cherry had invented. It was a real life she was choosing. The wedding itself was small and intimate. When I stood up to speak, my hands shook, not from fear, but from emotion. I spoke about Cherry's independence, her stubbornness, her heart. I spoke in English and then again, haltingly, in Spanish, with help from a translation app I'd practiced with for weeks. Marco's family applauded. Cherry cried. After the reception, when the music softened and the guests drifted away, Cherry pulled me aside. "Thank you for letting me go," she said. That sentence stayed with me. A few days later, we drove her to the airport. One-way ticket. No return date. Robin hugged her so tightly I thought he might never let go. Drew held it together until we were back in the car, then stared out the window in silence. I cried the entire drive home. The house felt different without her. Quieter, lighter, emptier. But the fallout wasn't destruction. It was adjustment. Cherry called a few days after she arrived. Then again, then regularly. The calls were different now. She asked about Robin's school, about Drew's work, about what I'd cooked that night. She listened. She found a job teaching English. She enrolled in intensive Spanish classes. She sent pictures of their small apartment, of Bogotá's streets, of herself bundled in a jacket at night, laughing. "Yes," she admitted in a message once. "You were right about the cold." That jacket, once a symbol of control, became a joke between us. A reminder that advice doesn't always have to feel like a threat. The house settled into a new rhythm. Robin reclaimed the dining room table. Drew and I rediscovered quiet evenings together. Cherry's room became a guest room. Not erased, just transformed. The fallout wasn't someone losing. It was everyone changing. And for the first time in a long while, that change didn't feel like failure. It felt earned. 6 months after the wedding, I stood in Cherry's old room, now a guest room, smoothing the sheets we'd laid out for her summer visit. The sunlight hit the walls differently without her posters. Her makeup scattered across the dresser, her shoes kicked into corners like punctuation marks at the end of messy days. The house was quieter now. Not lonely, just calmer. Cherry calls us several times a week. She's settled into life in Colombia more than I ever expected. She teaches English at a language school, attends Spanish classes in the evenings, and sends me voice notes practicing new phrases, laughing when she messes up. Her confidence feels earned now, not performative, not defensive. She and Marco share a small apartment near his family. She's learning how to navigate public transportation, cultural differences, and independence in a way that no argument in our kitchen ever could have taught her. And us? Drew and I are different too. We stopped trying to parent an adult like a child. We stopped confusing control with care. We learned that boundaries aren't walls. They're bridges that tell people where love can exist without resentment. Robin is happier. He's louder. He invites friends over again. He no longer disappears upstairs when voices rise because they don't rise like that anymore. Looking back, I realized the question was never, should I kick my daughter out? The real question was I willing to change too? Cherry didn't need punishment. She needed clarity. She needed to feel respected and accountable. And I needed to accept that raising a strong child means eventually stepping aside and trusting that strength, even when it scares you. Letting go didn't mean losing her. It meant giving our relationship room to grow. If there's one lesson I carry forward, it's this. Sometimes the loudest conflicts in a family aren't about dishes or rules or raised voices. They're about someone standing in the space between who they were and who they're becoming, and everyone else struggling to adjust around them. You don't solve that by tightening your grip. You solve it by opening your hands and trusting that love, when it's real, doesn't disappear just because the house gets quieter.